Good day. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Barbara Dunn with the law firm of Barbara Dunn Law, and you're joining us for Legalese with the Lady, music licensing for business meetings. Very fortunate today to be joined by my dear friend and industry colleague, Michael Owen, who will share our conversation with us, share, will share a conversation with me on music licensing, a topic that isn't often discussed, but yet it is important for meeting and event organizers to understand. My background is representing groups, meeting and event organizers on all manner of legal issues, from contracts to risk management and everything in between. And I've been fortunate to get to work with Michael Owen over many years now. Michael will share a little bit about his background, and then we'll dive into a conversation, which I know you'll find interactive and interesting, and of course, informative on this topic, music licensing. Michael, share a little bit about yourself today.
Well, I have been in the entertainment business all my life. My last real job was in 1969 when I left college to go play music on the road. Then got into the business of music. Some years later, discovered the meetings industry and corporate entertainment. So I handle corporate. I don't do hard ticket events, soft ticket events with events, exhibitions, conferences, conventions, and that's exclusively my portfolio now. Some years ago, I got started because there's an awful lot of confusion around music licensing as it relates to meetings and events, and I got started doing some presentations. And I kind of got busy with some other things, and then I read an article in one of the meetings industry magazines that said, make sure when you go to your hotel or your venue, make sure that they have a license for music and you'll be covered. And my head exploded. And then I called the editor and I said, that's misinformation, so we need to get it straight. So what we hope to do is take maybe some of the mystery out of it today. Um, it's not as hard as it seems, and we'll be sharing a lot of information. So we're hopeful that it will help you when you're making your decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. Again, looking forward to our conversation. So, just to set the stage for the conversation today, we'll talk first about why and how music licenses work, why you need them, how they work. We'll go through some frequently asked questions. These are questions you may have on your mind or others have asked us over the years, and it will give you a response on those. And then we'll wrap with a bit of an action plan. So, some items and resources that you can look into for your own organization as you consider the music licensing aspects. Michael, before we jump into the topic, it has occurred to me that I don't believe it's often discussed or really even general knowledge what role music plays for meetings and events. How is it used? How is it valued?
Well, I think the best way I could describe that is imagine your general session has begun and your folks are walking in and there's no music. Imagine that your CEO has just been announced and called on the stage and there's no music. Or you have an award show and someone comes from the back of the room and the only music, the only sound accompanying that is the click of high heels or gentlemen's heels as they're coming to the stage. Um, it creates energy. It creates it eliminates dead space. There's any number of reasons why we use music. Now the question is, how do we use music and how do we use it legally so that we don't get into trouble? If you think about it, I think every aspect of the meeting in some form or fashion, even exhibitions, in some form or fashion, on the trade show floor, you're going to hear music. So I think it's a really important, well, it's a really important way to underpin what we're doing. Think of it as a score, a movie score. Think of watching a movie without music. So the energy is there, and the the tone. You can set the tone in any number of ways. So I think that's right. I think it's it would be awful. awfully boring if we didn't have music for it.
And to that point, it really adds value. And so we think about it that way. You think about contributing to the meeting, whether it's decor, whether it's other, aspects of the meeting. It really adds value, and I think that's really the point. So let's dive in on music licensing itself, because I think it's often misunderstood for the reasons that you've mentioned, and whether now knowing what a role and value it plays, why do the events have to be licensed? Why is music essentially protected? I mean, I often share with clients the fact that music it's an asset, right? It's a property right. It has a value. Our society values creative folks, creative works, photographs, sculptures, artwork, songs included. And so our laws, as we'll dive into the copyright law, support that protection. So, Michael, when it comes to the meeting and events, what is the interplay there with the music aspects of it?
Well, music is all personal property. Music has been created by someone somewhere, and in order to use that, you you want to borrow it for them, but you want to have permission to borrow it. Let me put it that way. And that's what this is all about. It gets down to its essence. It's making sure that you have gained the permission to use these songs. It's can sound complicated, and it's another pain in a planner's uh, toolkit to deal with. At the bottom, you'll see we'll share you some of the costs that are involved, and you'll see that in the scheme of things, it's not all that expensive to have it. And when you have the right performing rights permissions, you have access to almost any song, any pop song you ever heard. So, and all public performances, even if they're nonprofit, must be licensed. There are a few exceptions, religious and one thing and another, but face-to-face teaching in a nonprofit college, and there are permissions, but we don't have permission on a corporate event or an association event, but where we have attendees and that we need to get permission to use all the music. And the good thing is, when you do have these licenses, you have access to a huge, huge, almost all of the songs that you would recognize.
That's great. We'll walk into each of those concepts. I think it's important, and just setting the stage. A copyrighted work. So we'll just set the stage. Music is protected by copyright law. As you mentioned, it's owned by someone, the creator, the composer. It's protected by the copyright law. So in order to use it, to perform it, we'll see those rights. You need to have access, and the permission word. We'll talk a lot today. By the way, license is really just a fancy word for permission. And we'll talk about what your permission slip says, right, from the performing rights societies in a few minutes. But often, Michael, clients will say, well, the copyright law says performance, it says public performance of a copyrighted work. Well, my event isn't open to the public. So it's not a public performance, right?
Well, except that if it's defined as a place, copyright law defines a public performance as a place open to the public or any place where a substantial number of persons outside the family can walk in, and that they can't walk into your conference. It's a closed conference. When I say I do soft tickets, soft ticket uh, uh, concerts and presentations, what I mean by that is that we're not charged to attend the concert. We're charged to attend the meeting, and your registration gets you into the meeting, the breakout, all the meals, all of those things, and the music is adjacent to that.
So we focus a lot when we talk about that public performance as well. And I think you just touched on it, that anything outside, and this is terms that are used in the statute, we think about all the time. Anything outside of the scope of family and friends is considered public. And I think
Sure.
there's a big misnomer around that. So, Michael, I know we've got family weddings or events coming up in the future. You have family and friends at those events. Do you need the music licensing for that?
No, you don't. If it's close, again, it's close, a normal, close, normal circle of family, social acquaintances, etc. So I'm attending a wedding shower for my nephew. There's going to be a bunch of people there. He's got a lot of friends and stuff. That they don't care about that. That way you can put on Spotify or your Apple Music and play. That's not what we're worried about. What we're worried about is when you have registered attendees at your conference in a venue together. It's all about when you have, and we'll go more into this at later, but who is responsible for the uh, the licensing of the music.
So keep that in mind as you consider whether your organization needs a license. I would say you're likely erring on the side of saying a license is needed unless, and we'll talk through some of these very narrow exceptions. So I think it's important, but just pausing for a moment. What the heck is a copyright? What does it get you? What rights to come along with that, Michael? A song, right? A song, and you know the music industry. Someone sat down at a piano and wrote some notes. They composed lyrics. But really, what does that mean? What is this often intangible thing that we're talking about? What rights come along with it?
Well, uh, I was telling a story about the other day about had a show with Tim McGraw a few years ago down in Atlanta at big show, big event, and in our contract, when we do a contract, we state that the clients are responsible for not just for licensing, but for all permissions, venue, etc., all of that sort of thing. So as we were putting it together, the client said, "I don't understand why we have to pay licensing for Tim McGraw to come in and sing his song." So it's simple. He doesn't write all his songs. He cannot. He can say, "Well, it's okay with me if you play them," but that still does not take care of the creator of those songs. And that's where the copyright comes in. That's where the copyright confusion comes in. Is that plus the fact, by the way, that before Tim plays, you've got music playing as folks into the room, right? So there in how you use it. The good thing is when you have the licenses, it covers everything. It covers all of your events. If you're doing an event that's got a big celebrity act, if you're doing music on your general session stages, if you've got in an exhibit hall, if you're using music, it covers all of that for one fee. So it's all based on the number of registers you have, I think, on both ways. That, again, we'll share with you later, but uh, it's gives you permission. Let me say this. We'll go into what the different performing rights organizations are. But if you have the two that we're recommending, which is ASCAP and BMI, if you have those two, you've got 90, 95, 98% of the popular music over the last 100 years, including everything that's on the radio today. So that's where that goes. So when they assign, when you have your license, you have been assigned the right to use that music.
So that really goes back to that right of the owner, as you described, right? The person who wrote that song. That person has the sole right to perform the work, to duplicate it, to distribute it, to derivative work. For example, make the song in another language would be example of a derivative work. So what those performing rights societies are, and as you mentioned, we'll dive into that a little bit more. They're representing, we're not calling up the song composer every day and saying, can I use your music at my event, right? We're getting permission, that license, right? The permission slip and what it says. And these are the rights that we're wanting to make sure your organization has for your meeting and event so that you're not infringing, right, upon or damaging that party's copyright as well.
Well, and I think it's important to say to emphasize that term blanket. It's a blanket license. What a blanket license means is that you're licensed to use everything in their repertoire. Yeah, and again, the two big ones are BMI and ASCAP. Some artists are BMI writers, some are ASCAP writers, but it doesn't matter. As long as you have those licenses, you have permission to use that in every situation in your meeting, whether it's in the hallway, if you're doing a beach party, doesn't matter. As long as you have your blanket license, you have permission to use them here.
Yeah, let's dive into the concept and I think clients often ask, right? Well, what's the big deal, right? I know people that play music all the time at their events and they never pay a license, and I hear that a lot. It is a big deal from a legal standpoint, and I would take a position, maybe you agree, Michael. It's a huge deal from a business standpoint. So, from a legal standpoint, if you infringe on that right, that property of the other, that can make your organization liable. And if anybody in the food chain of your event doesn't have a license and the music is played, the event organizer, the sponsor, the so-called owner of the event is responsible. There's this concept of vicarious liability, that you're responsible for everyone on that food chain if they infringe on those rights. So it's important from a legal standpoint. You could absolutely be sued for copyright infringement and all the rest. From a business standpoint, it's huge from a perception standpoint. Think of the headline tomorrow on somebody's website is, ABC organization violates copyright law, right? Infringes, doesn't respect the rights of musicians, right, Michael? These are things that could be used against the group, and for little reason, when it is not difficult and it's definitely not expensive, as we'll show, right, to get that license.
Well, the truth is that none of these organizations have armies of people out patrolling ballrooms. It's also true that if someone from one of those organizations happened to be staying at the hotel and walked by and heard a song and recognized it from their portfolio and turned it in, now the next thing you know, you're stuck. And they are relentless once they do that. It's funny because on the one hand, they haven't been real user friendly as far as trying to figure this out, which is what a role we're trying to play, is trying to help you figure this out. On the other hand, if you don't, if you don't take care of this, and even by accident you get caught, it can be very, very expensive.
Definitely something that you want to avoid. And, often as I'll talk with clients about risk management, they'll say, well, can I proceed without this in my contract? Or can I proceed without having the music license? Sure. But what's your risk tolerance? Do you have a significant amount of risk tolerance? In other words, you're willing to accept a lot of risk? Again, you have to factor that in, I think, as you look at balancing and getting all compliance issues, certainly on the music licensing side. Ask yourself, is my organization willing to accept the risk? And Michael, I know there's a lot of exceptions to paying licenses when a license might be due. And so wanting to make sure, we've talked about the fact that it really isn't even a public performance if it's within the scope of family and friends. There are some exceptions that you've highlighted here that bring to the listener's attention.
Well, you know, it, the get my thoughts together. I'm glad that you mentioned risk. Okay, let me just slide back for just a little bit. This is a part of risk management. It's like anything else. It's like having an EMT on site. Right? It's like anything else. It's making sure that you are covered in the event that something happens. Right? We don't think about it a lot, but we just say, "Oh, good, we'll plug in Spotify and we're good to go." But that's not really true. But it's like anything else. It's like all personal property. You have to ask permission to use it. All public performances must be licensed, whether it's a concert, whether it's a sports bar, whether it's a corporate event. There are a few exceptions. Religious service, place of worship, face-to-face teaching. If the professor wants to use music to present in a nonprofit educational setting, then that's fine. If I use music in my presentations live, then if the I always check to see to make sure that the client has their licensing,
Mhm.
because not only does it cover bumper music and live music, it covers music in those presentations. And as we'll get into, the presenter or the band or the DJ can't get that license. That license must come from the presenter of the event.
It's a really great point you made, Michael, about speakers, because oftentimes clients don't think about the fact that a speaker might themselves plug in Spotify or Apple Music ahead of their program. And if the group doesn't have the license fee, again, that concept of vicarious liability, the group, the event sponsor, can be held liable for that. So here again, just to cover all the bases, I think it's important to consider that and make sure that licenses are there. I've had a few clients over the years have circumstances which fall into these exceptions. Certainly organizers of large religious events, to the extent there's a religious service component, that's covered. You mentioned the nonprofit. It's an exception. It's really limited. It doesn't mean that if you're a nonprofit trade association, a professional organization, you're covered by that. It's a completely different circumstance. But just to call attention to these exceptions and keep those in mind. But to me, the safest approach, risk management wise, is to start with the assumption that the license is required unless you determine that it would fall into one of these exceptions.
Exactly right. Exactly right. There are two basic copyrights: performing arts, which is where our focus is now, is for the song lyric. Sound recordings, we're not really concerned with that here, but it's important to know. But the performing arts uh, copyrights are owned by the publisher and/or songwriter. The sound recording is owned by the label. And I had a couple examples, and we were talking about this earlier, Barbara and I. And one thing she brought up was Taylor Swift. I don't know if you recall, but Taylor started in a record company in Nashville. Her contract, the record company owned master recordings that they take and they make to distribute the music. She left that company, went to another company. The owner of the studio that owned her masters sold it to one of Taylor's former agents without her permission. Now, by contract, it was okay. I mean, he was within his rights to sell it. It was probably not the most upright thing to do, but that's what you do, I guess, in the music business. That's why it's got such a bad reputation. But what happened is once he sold it, then the other fellow could use those masters any way he wanted to. He could release greatest hits. He could do all sorts of things. And Taylor, who may be the smartest woman, not only in the music business, but maybe the smartest woman in business, period, said, hold on a second. I want to get those back. Couldn't get them back. But she said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell all my many uh, fans that, hold on a second, you want to hear my music? I'm going to re-record. So she re-recorded every album that she had out before. That's why you hear Taylor's version.
Right.
It's this song, Taylor's version. It's because she has recorded it, and her fans and everybody knows about Taylor's version. It, all of the money goes to her instead of going to somebody who happened to buy them at a grocery store or something.
I think, and Michael, that story illustrates so many concepts, and I think for Taylor uniquely, so perhaps not entirely uniquely, there are lots of folks like that. She wrote everything. She wrote the lyrics. She's made the recording. She had ownership of both of these aspects of copyright. However, there's lots of examples like you gave. I love the song "Crazy." That's a
Oh
Patsy
yeah,
Cline song.
yeah, yeah.
And I know you shared with me there are different owners of different aspects of that
Well,
song.
if you think about praise, and many of the songs. Okay, I come from Nashville. I'm no longer in Nashville, but I grew up in Nashville and very active around the creative community, which are the songwriters. Okay, so if you think about it now, you think about Patsy Cline singing "Crazy." What a classic, unbelievable classic song. But she didn't write it. Willie Nelson did. Willie created the musical composition while he wrote down the notes and lyrics, and Patsy created the sound recording. So if you buy that, Patsy gets some money on the sound recording. Willie gets the money on the actual copyright of the song. Um, and that's kind of the way that it works. It gets complicated. Plus, now you can go a shade deeper in the way the country folks write songs now. Is you have three or four guys get in the room and write a hit song, or Jelly Roll, or Tim McGraw, or um, Keith Urban, or something like that. And now you've got Keith, and unless he could also be a writer on the song, or he could not. So it's very confusing when it gets back. There's a lot of back of the house stuff, but it's important to understand. We tell you this to understand kind of why um, that they do this, that you do it the way uh, that they do it the way it is, and why the licensing is important to have the right license.
Absolutely. And I know these are interesting stories and great examples. We know there are authors or composers of songs that have less listened, so to speak, but it is important no matter whether the song is a very popular, well-known song or a minor, less known song. The fact is those folks created property, right? Work. And if you want to use that property, have that song at your meeting and event, that's where you pay the fee. And so, Michael, diving into that point, remember we got this permission slip, right? This license. What does it cover? Am I signing permission for limited rights? I know you referred to that term blanket.
Well, it's you have blanket rights for any tune in each of these organizations' portfolios. What that means is anytime that you manage that you're managing an event, again, whether it's your general session, whether it's your breakout, whether it's your opening event, whether it's your closing event, whether you do a beach party with a DJ or a Jimmy Buffett band or whatever, you're covered for all of those things. It depends on, um, where you want to go with it. I'll give you an example of where it gets a little confusing, which is why you ought to work with a pro, no matter who it is. I'm not saying for me, but anybody get a pro. Let's say you have an event, um, and you're doing a reception in the lobby bar at the hotel. Okay, and you just went in and you said, "We want to reserve this space and do that," and they've got their DJ or band playing, and the hotel's responsible for that. Now, if you buy out the lobby bar and you go in and bring in your own DJ or band, now you're responsible for that. That's the bad news. The good news is it's covered by the blanket license. So you can have your event can take 10 days, and everything you do in there, as long as you have your license, you are licensed to use that music. And if you think about the alternative, well, I'm just not going to pay the license because there are plenty of places where I can get original music. Have you ever been in a bar where a band's playing original music? There's nobody in there. Well, it's not, you can't play Earth, Wind, and Fire. You can't play who? Elton John. You can't play any of these stars, any of these good hits, familiar hits that are the people movers. You're playing stuff that people have never heard of. So could you do it? Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, again, I think it goes to the value, the impression that the meeting organizers want to have for their event. Lasting impression. You're sharing the fact probably a lot of those listening or viewing could relate to a memory, something happening and tied to a song, right? Tied to music. Lots of memorable things happen at meeting and events, things that probably many of us remember way back when, perhaps because of music. So it does have that value. And, I think in particular, Michael, we were chatting about speakers. People, organizers spend a lot of money on speakers to come in and get the group fired up or share industry knowledge or experience. But a lot of those speakers, they want to come out to music, right? They want to come out to some fanfare. And while we're waiting for that person to come out, we're also wanting to get the crowd hike up. So, the example, this question that you had posed is a frequently asked question that I get, which is, one of the speakers wants to enter the program with a background, and it's only going to play for less than a minute. So you don't need a license, right?
Actually, you do. There's no fair use in this circumstance. Fair use is a kind of a nebulous term. It is there that you can use certain snippets of music without permission. Like, for instance, you think about the news channels, if they're reporting on a concert or something that's going on with music, they can use up to a certain number of seconds of that, and then they must cut it off. So again, bad news is if your speaker wants you, the speaker, by the way, can't license the music. Right now, if the speaker takes that presentation and it includes music and they broadcast it, that's on the speaker, right? But if they're presenting on your stage, they can't buy it. That's a bad news. Good news is it's covered by the blanket license.
That's an important point to emphasize. Again, going to this concept of fair use. That term, to your point, Michael, nebulous at best. To me, I often tell clients it's an exception that I wouldn't necessarily rely on unless you have a big tolerance for risk. Because again, you're going to be making exceptions in the face of what likely is something that's required, because it isn't necessarily just the amount of time a music is played. It's the nature of it, right? And the significance. And even if this one aspect of your event did fall under fair use, it doesn't mean all the other aspects are covered.
That's right. And if you think about where the money goes, it won't go into a lot of detail, but it goes to the licensing organization. It goes to ASCAP and BMI, and there's really one other player that's kind of weak in this space. Recording artists and songwriters don't earn royalties in the same way. Recording artists earn money on the sale, or in these days, streaming. Very little in streaming of the recording. They don't earn royalties on public performance. When their music plays on the radio, they don't get paid for that, right? But the creators, the writers do. The writers and the publishers are the ones who get it. So that's where the money goes. The only current instance where the artists earn royalties for public performances is in the digital arena, webcast, satellite radio, non-interactive. So there's a variety of ways that they do, but for our purposes, that's where the money goes. The money goes to the writer of the song.
Again, you think about license fee, right? Remember, permission slip, you're paying for something, you're getting something in return, right? This permission to use these works in a very broad sense. Right. So you mentioned the performing rights organizations, just showing their logos up on the screen. I'll share the experience, again, coming from the meetings industry. And Michael, you've been fortunate, as I have, to get to work in the meetings and events industry. We've seen our industry take the lead in many ways, but in particular, about 25 years ago or so, a group of industry leaders got together and went to BMI and ASCAP, which, as you mentioned a moment ago, together own probably 99% of the repertoire that's out there commonly used in music, and said, look, meetings and events and trade shows are different. It's different than running a retail store. It's different than running a hotel. We need a license that works for us, right? You've told us, yes, we have to get a license for our event. We need a license that works with us. And that's what we now benefit from within the meetings industry. All the things you mentioned, how broad that license is. This license is specifically tailored for the meetings industry. And I know, Michael, you shared a little bit about the two organizations, BMI and ASCAP. Their approach is different, but as you'll see in their fees and fee schedule approach, it's pretty straightforward. And even for the largest of events, it is subject to caps or limits on the fees. So really, again, our industry really took the lead, and this is something that all event organizers should be aware of. You gave an example earlier. If I called up BMI and said, "Do I need a license to play this music?" Someone's going to say yes. How much is it going to cost? They could make up a number, right? Being meeting an event organizer, you're going to go into that conversation knowing what that looks like. So I'll let you share, Michael, a little bit about that license fee approach. I know you were active in organizations like Meeting Professionals International that really led the way for the formation. Again, blanket licenses, so very broad and specifically tailored for the meetings and events industry.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I know that some of this stuff may seem a little deep, but the truth is, if you don't understand the why, why they did it, who gets it, and even what types of licenses there are, if you can get at least a working grasp of that, it helps you to understand, okay, well, this makes sense. And what I've said to clients who just pulling their hair out, I don't want to do this. It's not up to me to tell you what to do or how to do it. I would tell you this, that in the scheme of things, as you'll see later, and when we should go through some of the pricing models that they currently have, it's not really expensive. I mean, if you think of what you invest in linens and centerpieces and couches, if you do alternative setups, and oh my God, forget about the big digital screens and the sound system that you had to have, and rigging. Oh my gosh, trust me, it doesn't cost anywhere near those things. But there are three kinds of licenses. The mechanical licenses, that refers to permissions granted to someone in type of medium, a cassette plate, CD, etc., public distribution. They the publisher grants rights for the musical composition to be reproduced. It's paid to the recording artist, songwriter, and publisher based on the number of recordings. The sync license has to do with something used for a television program, a film, a commercial, a radio, 800 number, phone number, that sort of thing. What we're really concerned about here is the performing rights organ, or royalty, rights and royalties. It's a license is the right to play or sing music recorded or live on radio, television, live concerts, meetings and conventions, and program music services, as well as through other media such as the internet. So we are really concerned only with the performance. This is for information, but we're really concerned mainly and solely on the performing rights commission. So I think
this question comes up a lot. I think you already addressed that hotel example, but yeah, I have my meeting and event at a convention center, right? They have music. Aren't they're a public place, right? Aren't they required to take care of all that? Can't we be covered under their agreement? We pay a lot of money to rent the license.
They absolutely are required to have their license, but their license covers music in public spaces and spaces of public use, whether it's the hallway, the elevator, the gym, the spa, the nightclub, or whatever they may have, the bar. That's what that covers. It does not cover you. What happened is sort of the same thing. We went through this with Wi-Fi. When Wi-Fi, thankfully, we're not arguing over that anymore. But when Wi-Fi was very new, and it was who was responsible, they say, well, the hotel has high Wi-Fi. But when you open the doors to the ballroom and walk into the ballroom, for that period of time, you're not in the hotel space anymore. You're into the event presenter space, and that's why it is the way it is. That's why it's important to have your life. But again, I had someone at the article said, "Oh no, just tell them, ask them." I've had folks say, "Our production company takes care of that." No, they don't. They can't. Our DJ takes care of that. No, they can't. Our performer, no. It is the ultimate person who has the ultimate charge over what is going on, makes the ultimate decision. That is who is responsible for music rights.
So we've talked a lot about this concept of blanket. that is used to really convey that it's very comprehensive in what it covers. Again, just kind of peeling that back a little bit on that meeting and events industry license. Again, it's a performance license to host a public performance of a copyrighted work, and it's pretty broad rights, Michael. I think as you made that point.
Well, all the music in each of their repertoire can be used for one fee, regardless of how it's used. That pretty much sums up what we're talking about. Is that the different areas you might, if you think about how much music is used in events, I mean, it's everywhere. It's everywhere that you go. But if you have your blanket license, you are solid and you have access. And there's where the value comes in, access to all of these tunes that these organizations cover. But it's the owner. It's the owner of the event is who is required to pay to have the license.
And the license isn't specific, although we'll talk about this fee structure with the license fees, which is often tied to attendance. When an organization gets a license from BMI or ASCAP, it applies to that organization. It applies to all of their meetings and events. So it isn't necessarily specific to just one event, although they may be asking that, right? And I think that's another point that you were making. No matter whether you're opening the doors, it's a boardroom, right, for some music, right, or it's the large event or ballroom gala, that's still going to be something that's covered.
They charge by the number of attendees or the number of events or the number of events. A public stadium for Taylor Swift concert, where she did 80,000 people. Now that bill was pretty darn large, but the responsibility for that goes to the promoter of the event, which in this case is probably Live Nation, kind of everywhere. But whomever that at any public event, public stadiums, arena events, the promoter is always responsible. Performers, agents, managers, DJs, production companies do not and cannot pay for permission to use the song.
I'll often describe to clients the fact that whether it's a live or recorded, that's just the conduit by which the music is played, right? It's the thing. It's the public performance that is the trigger. And to your point, to the event organizer, owner of that event, so to speak, that's the trigger. How it's performed really in that way doesn't matter, because to your point, those folks performing it aren't responsible for a license of a public performance.
Well, if you think of it in terms that we've already discussed, such as risk management, such as the ability to play any darn song you want at any time you want, at any of the events you want in that whole thing, it's pretty. The license is powerful. I'll put it that way, and it protects on the back end. Your risk. It gives you the permission. Listen, I don't work for ASCAP and BMI. In fact, I'm very frustrated by them both, because every time I need clarification on something, I always, when we're doing this presentation that I did here, reached out to them, and they're kind of busy. They don't know kind of what's going on. So that is, if I sound like I'm being an advocate, I'm being an advocate for people getting paid for what they create, right? And I'm also an advocate for my clients not going to jail or having to pay a $50,000, $70,000 fine.
Or having the reputational damage, right?
Right. And they can say, I want a list of all the songs you played. I mean, if it gets into a lawsuit, that they're going to ask you for, we want a list of every song that was played during the course of your event. We're going to see who that was. If it was on ours, we're going to add that to it. And it's going to be, I don't know, $750 a song or something ridiculous. It can get really crazy. Thankfully, they don't do a lot of patrolling, but that's not a good reason not to have yourself protected.
And, I know we have an illustration, Michael, that you shared about those license fees, how the two different major performing rights organizations calculate the fees for the meetings and events.
Right. The rates for is determined on a number of objective factors, including what you use the music for, where you're there. It's this is from ASCAP. By the way, this is current. I've been doing a version of this session for a number of years, but this is current as of last week. Under 1,500 attendees for ASCAP, the $163 to use all of their material. And then you can see the chart. You can read the chart yourself. It goes down to say 3,000 to 5,000. Let's say an MPI conference, $574, right, to cover all the songs that you use for ASCAP. Now that's ASCAP songs. Here's BMI. BMI is a little bit different. The per attendee fee is 9 cents per attendee times the total registered attendees minus the minimum fee paid. So you'll pay $200 no matter what. And I'm sorry, that should say 225 there. But you pay $200 regardless. Now, once you go into the contract and you say, I have 1,000 people, or however many people you have, those things will apply, and the minimum fee is applied to that. So as you can see, it's a cost and it's a hassle, but it's not out of control. It's not crazy. What's crazy is if you get caught and don't have it.
Right. And that's, from a budgetary standpoint, this is an expense that should be budgeted no matter what. I think that's one thing, because we value music, and yet often it's because it isn't necessarily something you can reach out and touch. You don't think about it in a budget for a meeting and event, but yet it's an important component. And the fact is, as we've illustrated, not having it is really going to hit your budget if there's an infringement claim. And again, obviously that's what we want to try to avoid. Michael, this is a FAQ we both probably have got over the years, just emphasizing the point again. Hey, I don't, someone saying, hey, I don't need a license, right? Because it isn't the public event, right? So just illustrating the point, public events, and what that exemption applies to.
Well, and copyright law defines a public place as any place outside of a normal circle of family or friends. You use that application and say, okay, so that's why the license is different for a hotel. So, everybody comes in, gets to listen to their music. In our case, in our industry, everybody has to buy a ticket, be a member, register, or whatever. So you have those folks that come in, and yes, that has to be covered. That is why, as you said, I had forgotten about that, Barbara, but that MPI and some others thought about that years ago and said we need to define exactly what this is, because it was in response to several organizations getting hit very hard by fines and by and legal, and they take it to court and they lose because it's all copyright law.
Another frequently asked question, Michael, or point, I think we've already touched on this, but if they're playing live music, if you've hired a band and a singer is performing live music, aren't they the ones that are the performance? The license would be required from them, not from the event organizer.
Well, and the law says, I hesitate to say this with Barbara on here, but the law says all who participate in or are responsible for the performances of music are legally responsible, since it is the business owner who obtains the ultimate benefit from the performance. It is the business owner who must obtain the license. Okay, so that's from the law books.
So you think about, Michael, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I think you're thinking about, again, the music as a thing of value. It enhances the meeting. It's going to value to the owner and those folks, as you mentioned, which I think is another great way to think about it as well.
Well, and this is where it came in really more or less, we don't carry CD players anymore. We don't do it. Everything comes from streaming. And it's I paid a subscription to Spotify or Pandora or Apple Music or Amazon Music. Doesn't that mean we have the right to play it? No, the organization, the streamer, pays to be able to play. If you're playing that for someone else, it doesn't. Let me say it this way: it doesn't matter where you get the music. If it's a monkey and a banjo, or if it's
Right.
Spotify, or if it's uh, Apple, or whatever those things are, if you're using that for a public, or if it's a live band, you're using it for a public performance, you have to pay the price. Because you bought a CD does not give you permission, or bought a subscription to Spotify or one of those other platforms, does not give you permission to use that in any way you wish. Now, close family or personal and friends, you can play anything you want, anytime you want. That's okay. But in our setting, it's not. So
So, yeah,
you have a,
this
it gives you,
happens.
yeah, exhibit hall, right? You got Joe who's playing music in his uh, booth and aggravating all the booths around him by playing music in his booth.
Right.
Uh, and you say, well, wait a minute, we don't have any other music, but you do. But the truth is, as I was saying earlier, with a blank, that's the bad news. It's not the exhibitor, it's the owner of the event. The good news is you have a blanket, right? So if you
And
have the line, you're
y-
covered.
Absolutely, Michael. I think you said that, and I will always make the point to clients too. You can cover your bases well to the exhibitor and say if you have copyrighted works in your booth, right, you're responsible for the fee. Now, granted, again, as you point out, we're going to have a license fee for the whole event, but you can reference the use of music. Prohibited, of course. To your point, I get a lot of times that the decibel level is too high. Exhibitors and distracting and so forth, but we often also address that important item in an exhibit contract as
Well,
well.
an exhibitor is also an attendee. So they have paid to show up and attend and use aspects of their exhibit for the benefit of the organizations that are presenting the event. Um, Slide presentations, videos, sound equipment, any of that sort of thing is covered. So the bad news, good news. Bad news, man, you can't offload this risk. Good news, doesn't cost a lot to be protected.
Yeah, great point. And I know as we kind of get wrap up, right? It's like what happens, right? What's the worst that can happen, right? Famous last words of a lot of people or a lot of organizations that have been caught without a license.
When the court assesses damage, if you use another property without permission, for instance, at ASCAP, I think this has gone up. I think this figure has gone up. There's a minimum of $750 for each song infringed. And you are required to pay attorney's fees and court costs. Right. So if you think about it, if you think you've got a DJ and you get busted because of a DJ, or you get busted by music on your walk-in music, but they find out you have other events in conjunction with your conference, um, they could charge you a minimum of 750, and I'm going to bet you that's probably around $1,000 now on each song infringed. And again, it's not like they have the music patrol police out looking and searching and one thing and another, but all anybody has to do is walk by your ballroom, hear a snippet of something, or by wherever your music is occurring, and say, "Wait a minute, I work for ASCAP or I work for BMI. I think that's one of our writers." And then they go back to the organization, and they have attorneys on staff ready to hop at any situation like this. So while they don't, the enforcement mechanism is, say, well, I don't know, maybe I'll just kind of skip it. You wouldn't skip insurance. You wouldn't skip um, what a good sound company. You would, I mean, and in truth, as you saw before, when you saw the amount you pay, the amount you pay is reasonable for the return that you get and the value that music adds. I love that term, value.
So this just raises that exact point that you made, Michael. The cost of the license is a lot less than the risk of getting caught. Whereas I share with clients many times, it's easier and a whole lot cheaper to keep you out of trouble than to get you out of trouble. And I think that's obviously really one of the key components of our session together and our conversation together today. And just closing on that note, no pun intended, emphasizing the value of music, the fact that it is an important right. We respect the rights of those that created that music. And again, enhancing our events, having the music, something that is definitely important element. And Michael, I'm going to let you have the last word, but I'm going to ask you a question with that. And that is, if you had to come up with the soundtrack to describe your life by that, what song would that be?
Well, for me, I think of soundtrack rather than a song. Well, if it was a song, it would be "Get Up Off of That Thing" by James Brown. If it were a television or movie theme, it would be the theme music behind Survivor with all the energy. You know, it's a great way to think about when you're watching these shows that think about the Survivor. I don't know if everybody watches it, but if you do, they build tension. It is about the participants in the competition, but that music comes up when it gets exciting. It goes down and it's supposed to be soft. And that's exactly what we're doing when we put meetings. That's how we use the music is to level everything off or to build it up when we want to build it up. And so, yeah, I think because my life, I'm a survivor, so I think Survivor would be great. I think the music is so darn dramatic. I just see myself opening the door and whoa, 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 whoa. You know, that's what I like.
That's terrific. Thanks for sharing that. And Michael, thank you so much for spending some time with me today to chat about this important topic and share your expertise. Thank you all as well for listening in to our conversation today. We look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Brilliant.
Route. Sean, I don't know if we lose you.
Nope. I'm here.
Okay.
We're good job, guys. Good to end the session now. I want to make sure we align whether it's now for 2 minutes or via email. Probably be best maybe to do it via email because I got to get rolling. On timeline and what your vision is for the content afterwards. Like, I don't know if you're thinking clips would be best or if it's just like the full recording, but I definitely want to align with you on that so we can get it edited.
Great. Yeah. I would definitely, the intent, if we could get a 30-minute, recording of, the content that we delivered, I think that would be great. And then Michael and I are definitely thinking that we'd want to do a live version in some ways of this components and just open it up to additional questions too, if that's a possibility.
Cool.
Yeah. What I think that find in the live ones, what we get is a lot of, not only a lot of additional questions, but we also get real life examples of what has happened. So it'd be great to do one of them.
Cool. All right. So what I'm hearing is we'll do a live version in the future, but we'll trim this one down, get it cleaned up for targeted 30 minutes. But I'll send you a recap email on an update on like what we're thinking, what we can do timeline wise for getting this finalized.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean, for putting time and platform. Thank you, Michael, for being a willing contestant here. Survivor.
The answer is always how high, Barbara. You know that.
Oh, that's great. Great.
Right.
Well, you
awesome.
will take care.
Yeah, really.
No worries. I don't know what's going to happen when I click end session. I think we all might get booted, but I'm looking forward to more of these.
Well,
Thanks so much.
if Barbara and I are not booted, I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about you. When you're done.
That's okay. Go for it.
But thanks
Go
again,
for it.
buddy. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much. Thanks, everybody.